Friends, fellow glarers, how we doing tonight? I'm going to please excuse the weird noises here. I'm adjusting my mic, and it's a very sensitive mic, so I apologize for that because I want to get it just right, where it picks up the sound just right. And what's up, Boston hippie? Really, really, really good to see you. Yeah, Boston hippie. Boston hippie, you showed up early, man. You're the first one to the party. You're like on the front porch, like, hey, is the party going on yet? Am I the first one here? But tonight, what I'm gonna be doing is I am going to be going over a case that I've been talking about going over since I started this channel, actually. And the the case is a murder case. It is a very, very nasty murder case. As a matter of fact, um, when the woman, Martha Ann McClancy, was convicted, the judge on her case said that it was the most heinous crime that he'd come across yet. So in his career, and we're going to be going over all the details. And the thing is about this, I'm going to be doing this one a little bit differently. Catherine Summers, how we doing? Ella D, new faces, well, one at least. This is going to be now. I'm gonna go ahead and say something here. I When I first thought about going on YouTube, long, long time ago, right when the Chris Watts Discovery had just been released, I had thought about doing this, and I never really got. I don't know. I guess I just didn't really have the confidence to do it too much, and I most definitely didn't have the know-how. Um, I I had no idea what I was doing, and I really, really wanted to do something, and I was probably going to do something true crime because I, like many of you that are listening, have somewhat of an affinity for trying to understand a great deal of it. And there was when the discovery for the Watts case had just dropped, there was a girl who covered it, and she did everything just perfect. I mean, all everything just kind of lined up for her right there and then. She had a really interesting look, and she had makeup videos, and her makeup was just right. She put a ring light up, and it created a somewhat ominous atmosphere, and she basically just read the discovery directly. She didn't write anything. She didn't rehearse anything. She pre-recorded it and just kind of edited it down. But she did all this on her phone. And what I liked about it was she wasn't trying to do anything fancy schmancy. She was very focused on the facts, and what better facts to collect from than the actual discovery itself. She wasn't interested in other YouTube videos and speculating. She wasn't interested in any of this stuff, it seemed like. And I was really intrigued, and I contacted her just to compliment her, like a lot of you guys do with me and probably a lot of the other YouTubers that you listen to and talk to, or listen to and enjoy. But I went ahead and did that, and she was really, really kind and receptive. And we ended up discussing the Watts case live in my group. And with the reading of the discovery that she had posted on YouTube got her something crazy like 6,000 subscribers, like immediately, like bam, it just happened. And she kept going with it. And she also moved on from the Watts case at that time. I remember we were talking about it, and we were like, we both agreed and came to the conclusion that there's nothing else to it. There's no reason to there's no reason to go over anything else. And mind you, this was months and months ago. This was almost a year. This was a year ago. Yeah, I think the discovery had dropped in October, if I'm not mistaken. I don't really remember exactly, but um, she she moved on from the Watts case and did other things and covered other cases and made other videos and collaborated with other YouTubers. And her and I had a falling out at some point, and I don't even remember exactly what it was. But I'm not the grudge holding type. I don't have anything to hold a grudge against her for. I don't know what she was upset with me about still to this day. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. Uh, I'm only mentioning this because she recently posted a video saying that she was no longer going to do any more videos under that persona. And she was going to take back all the merch. I don't know what that's about or anything, but I just wanted to go ahead and publicly say, Clarissa Chic, you will be missed, no matter what. I was a fan, and and that also got me thinking here. This case that I'm going to be covering tonight um, holds to me a bit of a personal. It resonates with me personally to a certain degree, because it involves a very close friend of mine, a friend of mine that I made in the past year, having moved to this area and having the job that I have, and him just kind of showing up every night, and then we just got to talking, and then just started hanging out, and then at some point he lays this on me and tells me that this is something that he experienced, that this is something that went on with his past. And when he started to explain it, my jaw was dropped. I mean, a good few minutes into the conversation, I was like, I couldn't find the words. And especially when you see the guy, when you know him, and if all goes according to plan, you guys will get to interact with him tomorrow night. So he's shockingly not. He doesn't seem psychologically affected. He's. It's almost like and I've never spoken to him about the whole glare thing. That's a very personal thing with me. Now, strangely enough, I share it with you guys, but nobody in my direct, immediate personal life really. No, I don't talk to anybody about it in person. Um, Maybe a couple of people here and there, but it's not something that I go around just yapping about. Um, so, but it's funny because we seem to have this thing in common, and if you asked him to put it into words, he probably wouldn't. But he behaves in this manner, and he just does naturally because he's just a nice, awesome, fun, cool guy, and I love hanging out with him, and I'm proud to call him a friend. And we, I told him that I had this YouTube thing, and if it was okay with him, I'd love to talk about it. And he was like, yeah, man, sure, whatever. Just super chill and super cool about it. And going back to Clarissa Sheik, I'm going to, that inspired me because this case is so important to me. I'm going to um, go ahead and do this as an expression of gratitude towards her for inspiring me. I'm going to go about this the same way she went about that discovery because I have in front of me the actual appeal um, for Martha Ann McClancy, which was filed in August. And everything that you're going to be hearing from me tonight is fact, or at least fact ruled by a court of law. So, no magazine articles, no newspaper articles, no there was a dateline that was done on it. It was a 2 hour long dateline, and it was. Give me just 1 second. Sorry about that. Okay, so it was a 2 hour long dateline, and supposedly, at least at some point, it was the most watched episode of Dateline to date. So, I don't know if it still is, but like I said, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be reading straight from the the uh, the file for appeal, or at least the prosecution's end of it. Now it's 45 pages, so get comfortable because you're going to get a lot of my opinions going in and out of this thing as I read it and go over all of these facts. And I promise you, it's pretty shocking. And Shawn is a hero, basically. Now, real quick before I get started doing that, let me say hi to some of my people here who showed up to the chat. We got Ella, we got Boston, Scott, my man Scott, we got AJ in the house, and we got Irish. I'm glad you made it, Irish. I'm really happy that you're here. And let's see. And Mignon is here. Tristan Wright, you're getting vodka. Yeah. Let me tell you guys something. I'm not drinking anything, at least not yet, anyway. But I'm probably gonna have some wine after this. If you guys if having a drink is your thing, you're definitely gonna want to partake here and get comfortable. Hey, Mystic, you made it to a live. All right. Well, we're glad to have you. So this appeal basically just kind of lays out what took place in the trial. So I'm going to read most of it out loud. Now, first off, before I do that, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Bob McClancy, the victim. Bob McClancy, and I'm going to refer to him as Bob, not Robert, out of respect to his family and respect to him because that's what he liked to be called. Bob was a Vietnam veteran, a decorated Vietnam veteran, and a hero. And he was also a police officer, and a retired police officer. a very personable guy, very funny guy, very fun person to be around, kind. Um, I didn't know him personally, obviously, but these are what everyone that knew him say. And I personally saw a home video that Shawn showed me of this person, and it was on a camping trip, and he was having the time of his life with his friends, and his friends seemed to love him, and it was fun to watch. Um, they would communicate with each other via CB radio, driving in different vehicles and playing over the CB radio, and I had a really good laugh watching them and having a good time. So yeah, AJ, I'm glad you're catching alive as well. Um, so uh, Bob was like I said, a particularly loved person generally by everyone, and uh, everyone mourned him. And Shawn was quoted in saying he was considered, this was Shawn's stepfather. Now, one thing I should explain to you about Shawn: Shawn is adopted, or was adopted, and Martha Ann was his adoptive mother. I don't have his adoptive father's name in front of me right now, but they divorced at some point during Shawn's childhood. She remarried to Bob, and the thing about Bob is that he was, being a decorated war hero, he was also he also struggled and even suffered from PTSD, post traumatic stress disorder, from the war, and from apparently a very, very life threatening altercation as a police officer. He was shot at, and I believe they missed, or he was hit and he survived. I'm not exactly sure. But he had apparently a very, very traumatic experience as a police officer, which just did not help his already existing post traumatic stress disorder from the Vietnam War. And as you can tell, I'm not reading any of this except for the uh, the appeal, and I thought it was important to again, when I'm going to be talking to Shawn tomorrow, it's just going to be me and him talking, and most of the questions I'm gonna leave up to you guys. So this is something that I know you guys don't get to hear very often. So at least in this manner, I'm not going to go the conventional route. I'm not a conventional guy. This is, like I said, something somewhat personal to me. So out of respect to the victim and his loved ones, I'm going to just discuss the facts, and yeah, I'm going to state some opinions about what I read here, because I have gone over some of this and it's awful. Um, so she was put on trial. Martha Ann McClancy was put on trial in 2015, and she was convicted. Um, and it was due to the May 15th, 2006 death of Bob McClancy. She was charged with first-degree premeditated murder, and her accomplice was a man by the name of Charles Kasmarzik. Very, very, it's hard to pronounce, or at least read it, because it's spelled crazily. This guy is a piece of work. I think he's dead now, and he died in prison. But I'm going to go ahead and start reading the factual overview here, and it states that the evidence adduced at the defendant's November 2015 trial, the defendant being Martha Ann McClancy, established that Mr. Chuck Kazmarzik, befriended the victim while the two participated in a 6-week residential treatment program for veterans with post-traumatic stress disorder. The two remained close after the program ended, and Mr. Kazmarzik began visiting the victim at the home he shared with the defendant. During this time, the defendant and Mr. Kazmarzik began a romantic relationship, and the defendant began discussing plans to kill the victim so that they could be together. So, basically, Chuck, who had become friends with Bob in a VA hospital, a inpatient program, I guess. I think it was an inpatient program, but apparently they had become very good friends in there, because Chuck was supposedly a war hero himself in Vietnam and suffered from PTSD as well. And during their friendship, Chuck began a relationship with Martha Ann, Bob's wife, his friend's wife. So there's that. The defendant, Martha Ann, who had agreed to be in charge of the victim's medication, indicated to Mr. Kazmarzik that she had been mixing medication into the victim's food. She asked Mr. Kazmarzik, who had been prescribed the same medication as the victim, to bring more medication to the residence, and she and Mr. Kazmarzik secreted the medication around the residence to make it appear as though the victim had been hoarding it. When the victim was hospitalized for a drug overdose, both the defendant and Mr. Kazmarzik told treating physicians that the victim had expressed suicidal ideations. After the victim returned home following that hospitalization, the defendant and Mr. Kazmarzik put into action a plan to over-medicate the victim and make it appear as though he had committed suicide. Okay. Mr. Kazmarzik, Chuck, telephoned 911 on May 15th, 2006 to report that he had discovered Bob's body. Officers responding to the call found the victim's lifeless body in his recliner, a pill bottle in one hand and a pistol in the other. The area around the victim was in disarray. The pills were strewn about. After officers discovered on a digital camera belonging to Chuck Kazmarzik photographs of the victim's body in a variety of poses that indicated that the scene had been staged, Mr. Kazmarzik was arrested and eventually charged with evidence tampering and criminally negligent homicide. The photographs were later deemed inadmissible due to the failure to obtain a warrant before searching the contents of the camera, and the charges against Mr. Kazmarzik were subsequently dismissed. So this guy got away. He was arrested right away. The police knew that this guy was shady. There's a lot of accounts about this guy that indicated that he was shady. People that were in the Air Force with him would say that he was shady. That he was, and he had a lot of he had a weird record too. He would I think he got arrested for theft a couple of times on the base, or got caught or something. But he was also he was just a very shady guy, is the way people would describe him. And the officer, the detective who discovered this digital camera, in his defense, he claims that he thought that the camera belonged to Bob, the victim. And so he went ahead and looked through it. I mean, he's a fucking detective. That's what he's supposed to do, right? If it's in his house where he lives, it made sense to look through it to see if you find anything. And lo and behold, he finds a shit ton of pictures of Bob, of his body in the recliner with pills in one hand and a gun in the other. And then, there's other pictures where the gun is not in his hand. There's other pictures where the pills are not in his hand. His body is positioned differently. So there's a bunch of these pictures, right? So it's blatant evidence that the body was being tampered with. So obviously they're going to suspect foul play here. And they arrest this guy immediately. But the thing was, it turns out that the camera was not Bob's. The camera was actually Chuck's. And he had the charges dropped against him because they never obtained a warrant to look through the camera. Even though they thought it was Bob's, turned out to be Chuck's. And so the charges were dropped. So this guy got away with murder, at least for the time being. Martha Ann and Chuck moved in together and began traveling extensively. The defendant applied for and received survivor's benefits from the United States Department of Veterans Affairs, the VA, and the United States Social Security Administration. The defendant and Chuck eventually married and began a scheme to defraud the federal government. Now this is where I start to get fucking infuriated. I'll just go on. A federal investigation led to their arrests and subsequent guilty pleas to theft in federal court. During the pendency of the federal investigation, the defendant executed a durable power of attorney giving her son Shawn authority to conduct her affairs while she was incarcerated. She also gave her son several computers for him and his children to use. After one of the children discovered a disturbing image on one of the computers, the defendant's son, Shawn, examined the contents of the computers and discovered the photographs of the victim that had originally been taken by Chuck's camera. He contacted the federal authorities, who in turn contacted the state authorities. He later turned the computers and some documents over to the state authorities. So basically, one of Shawn's kids saw some shady shit on one of the computers. And another thing you got to know about Martha Ann is she was known to be a bit of a hoarder. She was, when Shawn talks to me about this stuff and he tells me these stories, he's telling me that when she goes to jail, he gets everything, right? But it's just a bunch of shit that he doesn't want. We're talking like a semi-truck full of shit that he didn't want, because she just kept everything. But before all this happened, he gets to go through some of this stuff. The perk is that he gets to go through it and keep what he wants and, do what he wants with it, for the most part anyway. And the kids get these computers, and one of the kids just comes across some shit in the computers, and basically it's the same pictures that were in Chuck's camera that he got exonerated for because they didn't have a warrant to go through that camera. But this is a little bit different because these are the same photographs that are in Chuck's wife's computer, Martha Ann's computer, who she gave to Shawn, meaning that computer and its contents belong to Shawn by law. So therefore, that evidence gets to be used all over again, but we'll get to that later. But this is what led to her arrest and what led to her conviction. So, upon questioning by the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, Chuck implicated the defendant, Martha Ann, in the victim's murder and admitted that they had planned the murder together. So he totally just rolled over on her. He was already in jail for the fraud, but he totally just rolled over on her. Jeffrey Collins, yeah, he totally threw her under the bus. This guy's a total shitbag. Yeah. Oh, this gets more. I can't even. So Jeffrey Collins, a former Monroe County 911 operator, testified that on May 15th, 2006, he answered a call shortly after 5 p.m. from 215 Unicoi Lake Road, the Coker Creek residence in Monroe County. A recording of that call was played for the jury. Monroe County Sheriff's Office Patrol Officer Christopher Logan Day responded to the 911 call, and when he arrived at the Coker Creek residence, he encountered Mr. Kazmarzik, Chuck, walking from the house up the driveway approximately halfway between the house and the road. Officer Day patted Mr. Kazmarzik down and instructed him to remain outside while Officer Day and his partner conducted a sweep of the house. Upon entering the house, Officer Day observed white pills laying around in the floor and a lifeless body in a recliner, holding a pistol in his right hand and a pill bottle in his left hand. The victim had a cut or abrasion on his forehead that appeared to be recent to the time of death. The house, particularly around the kitchen, was certainly in disarray, Officer Day was quoted in saying. He observed a number of pills and documents, one of which documents he believed to be a living will, in the kitchen. Officer Day recalled that the defendant arrived a little bit later, but he had only limited contact with her. Martha Ann, of course. MCSO Detective Travis Jones also responded to the Coker Creek residence, where he took photographs and gathered information. Detective Jones identified photographs of the victim in the recliner. Detective Jones said that all the rounds were chambered in the pistol they took from the victim's right hand. In the kitchen, pills, a pill holder, and a do not resuscitate DNR order were lying on the counter. Wow. All right. He collected all the pills that were strung about through the house, the pill bottle in the hand, and also the pistol. Detective Jones said that the defendant arrived 30 to 40 minutes after he did and provided written consent to search the residence. The defendant, Martha Ann, also gave Detective Jones several different pieces of paperwork, including a journal of what she kept about the events in the VA and different stuff. The journal contained a variety of odd entries written by Martha Ann. So these guys come in the house after responding to a 911 call, right? And after responding to a 911 call, they go into the house. They see Bob dead in the recliner, cut on his forehead, pills in one hand, gun in the other, and on the fucking counter with pills all sprawled about, right? I guess this guy had this dramatic, I guess they're trying to paint this picture, basically, of a suicide because there's a living will just conveniently sitting on the fucking counter of the kitchen. So I'm picturing Bob just like, oh, I can't do this anymore, and throwing himself all over the kitchen with a bottle of pills, and then sprawls out onto the recliner and passes out before he can pull the trigger to the gun that he had in his hand. I mean, come on, man. Cops see this shit and immediately they're like, this is fucking crazy. This is obviously the act of somebody. This is from somebody's wild fucking imagination. So the cops immediately are onto this. So upon cross-examination by Martha Ann, Detective Jones testified that Mr. Kazmarzik was originally charged in 2006 with evidence tampering and criminally negligent homicide in relation to the victim's death. Mr. Kazmarzik was arrested at the scene on the day of the offense after Detective Jones viewed photographs of Mr. Kazmarzik's digital camera. Those photographs depicted the victim's lifeless body in a variety of staged scenes. Detective Jones acknowledged that another judge had ruled that he should not have examined the digital camera without a search warrant and had in consequence suppressed the photographs of the digital camera. Blah, 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 blah. We already know that. Detective Jones also acknowledged that in an interview conducted before his May 15th, 2006 arrest, Mr. Kazmarzik did not implicate the defendant in any foul play. Mr. Kazmarzik admitted to Detective Jones that he took the photographs with the digital camera and said that he had staged the scene to make it look like a suicide so Miss McClancy could benefit more through the VA benefits. So the motive here is Bob's VA benefits. Money. You know, I mean, what do I always say, man? What's the answer to 99 out of 100 questions, right? So, for sure, the motive here was just money. There's going to be more stuff in here about their schemes to get money, and I swear on my eyes that it is one of the most disgusting and stomach-turning schemes that I've ever heard of. I'll keep going here. Charles Kazmarzik testified that he had pleaded guilty to a charge of conspiracy to commit. Now, mind you, this is all from Martha Ann's trial that she was convicted on. Again, this is the appeal. So this is all things that took place when she was convicted. So Charles Kazmarzik testified that he pled guilty to a charge of conspiracy to commit first-degree murder in exchange for a 25-year sentence for his role in the victim's death. Mr. Kazmarzik testified that he met the victim in January 2006 when they both participated in a residential treatment program for PTSD at the VA hospital in Nashville. Mr. Kazmarzik recalled that he and the other 5 program participants, including the victim, pretty much all mirrored the same prescription medication regimen, which included clonidine, mirtazapine, and trazodone. Sorry, I'm not very good with medications. I apologize. He and the victim became close during the program, and after the program ended at the end of February, Mr. Kazmarzik attended a sort of reunion-type breakfast for program participants and their spouses hosted by the victim and the defendant at their home in Coker Creek. Mr. Kazmarzik recalled that as the program participants discussed their medication regimens and ongoing treatment programs on that day, he was struck by the defendant's detailed knowledge of the victim's medication regimen. He said that he thought she was a pharmacist. She knew so much about it, he added. It appeared that she knew each one of the medications, which the prescribed dosages were, when they should be taken, what the contradictions were, just more information than the average person would have as far as medications. Sorry, I can't read. Mr. Kazmarzik testified that he and the victim stayed in touch following the reunion breakfast and that eventually the victim invited him to come back to his place to visit him. Chuck said that he agreed to visit the victim because the victim was having some problems and his PTSD was possibly out of control. He said that when he went to visit Bob, who had been very energetic and active during the residential program, had become very lethargic. Chuck continued to visit the victim and Martha Ann at the Coker Creek residence and began attending the victim's medical appointments to the VA. During this time, the victim had never expressed any suicidal thoughts to Chuck. Chuck testified that the defendant initiated a sexual relationship with him in April 2006. During that same period, Martha Ann cut her hair and dyed it blonde. Martha Ann told him that she had cut her hair out of spite because Bob liked long hair. Toward the end of April 2016, the defendant added Mr. Kaczmarzyk as a card holder to the Discover Card account held by the victim and the defendant and provided Chuck with a card for his use. Wow. What? During their courtship, the defendant mentioned on several occasions that she would like to get rid of Bob and said that if he went away, her and Chuck could be together. At the end of 2006, Bob was hospitalized at the VA hospital in Johnson City following an apparent drug overdose. While the victim was hospitalized, Chuck attended a family meeting with Bob, and Martha Ann, and the victim's treatment providers. That was an ongoing overview of what his continued treatment would be when he was in fact released from the hospital. He recalled that at that meeting, the defendant, Martha Ann, agreed to be in charge of the victim's medication and stated that she would make sure that Bob took his medications as prescribed. Bob was released from the hospital on May 13, 2006, and Chuck drove him home to the Coker Creek residence. That night, Martha Ann prepared the victim's favorite meal, but when Bob complained that it didn't taste very well, Martha Ann put seasoning on it so that he would eat it. Later that evening, when Martha Ann remarked to Chuck that she had used magic dust on it, which he interpreted to mean that she had put medication into Bob's food. Chuck said that Bob's demeanor changed from alert and oriented to somewhat lethargic, intoxicated, and under the influence of drugs. And Chuck attributed the change in Bob's demeanor to Martha Ann's tampering with his food and medications. Chuck maintained that the defendant managed the victim's medications at the time, and she had been doing every day since he had been released from the residential treatment program. Chuck spent the night at the Coker Creek residence with Bob and the defendant. The next day, May 14th, 2006, the defendant told Mr. Kaczmarzyk that if he could happen to find the victim dead, he should keep it simple, which Mr. Kaczmarzyk interpreted to mean that the defendant wanted him to make it look as natural as possible or make it look like a suicide. Chuck again spent the night at the Coker Creek residence. He testified that he left the Coker Creek residence at approximately 6:45 a.m. on the following morning to attend some appointments in Knoxville. He said that when he left the residence, both the victim and the defendant were still there. The victim was in his recliner, and he appeared to be somewhat lethargic. When Chuck returned to the Coker Creek residence later that afternoon, he found Bob sitting on the floor with his pajamas kind of in a state of disarray. The victim called Kaczmarzyk by name and asked Mr. Kaczmarzyk to help him get into his recliner back in the living room. Chuck testified that he helped Bob into his recliner and then went to get the victim a bottle of water. Bob drank some of the water, and at that point in time, he expired and vomited. Although he believed that Bob had died, Chuck did not immediately call 911. Instead, he took some photos of the scene from the downstairs area and also from the upstairs area with him lying in his recliner, and then placed a bottle of pills in his hand and also a gun, before taking more photographs. He testified that he put the gun in the victim's hands because during the residential treatment program, the victim mentioned on several occasions that if he died due to his previous law enforcement experience, that he would like to die with the gun in his hand. What a crock of shit, dude. Listen to this. So Chuck said that he also emptied the pill keeper onto the table. He took the DNR order, the living will, which was already on the table and had been since we returned home from the hospital on Saturday, and placed it in a more prominent position. He said that he and the defendant had planned for the victim to be found while she was at work, so it would be an alibi. He said that their planning took place the day before the victim's death. Chuck said that after the police found the photographs of the victim on the digital camera, he was arrested and charged with obstruction of justice. Chuck acknowledged that he provided a statement to Detective Jones on the day of the murder wherein he claimed the victim was dead when he found him and that he did not touch Bob, the pills, or the gun. In a second statement given the same day, Chuck admitted that the victim was just barely alive when he arrived and that he helped Bob into the recliner. He admitted that he put the gun and the pills in his hand to make the scene look worse. I thought it might increase his VA claim, explaining that the victim had been previously declared 30% disabled. Mr. Kuzmarzik, Chuck, said that the defendant paid an attorney $50,000 to represent him. The charges were eventually dismissed after a judge ruled that the photographs on the camera were not admissible. All right. So a lot of this stuff we're hearing, I'm kind of repeating. So I want to get, okay, we're going to get to, this is where the scams come in. So, mind you, before I go on here, you got to keep in mind that Martha Ann and Chuck, after Bob dies, after they planned and murdered this man, they got away with this for 6 years. So they're collecting Bob's VA benefits and they're collecting Chuck's. Now there's more to the Chuck situation that I have not gotten to yet, but they're collecting from Chuck's, they're collecting from Bob, and they're collecting from Martha Ann as well. So they knew how to put together this scam and live very comfortably, going on cruises and shit, right? So following Bob's death, Martha Ann applied for a benefit called DIC, which means Dependent Indemnity Compensation through the VA. That was also known as the widow's pension. Additionally, based on the information that he possibly accidentally overdosed, that it was the VA's fault for them not managing his medication better. Wow. Bob was retroactively declared 100% disabled, which resulted in an award to Martha Ann of 100% what they call widow's pension. He thought the amount was $3,000 per month. Martha Ann paid off a $50,000 loan for Chuck, and he moved into the Coker Creek residence with Martha Ann. Martha Ann told him that she had cut and pasted the will, Bob's original will, so that his sister and his daughter could not derive anything financially from him. On June 15, 2006, Chuck and Martha Ann opened a joint bank account together. They were married on October 7th, 2006 in Las Vegas, Nevada, and then again on October 7th, 2009 in Blue Ridge, Georgia. Chuck said that Martha Ann insisted upon the second ceremony, telling him it was a woman thing. Martha Ann and Chuck traveled extensively after Bob's death, beginning with a June 2nd, 2006 trip to Atlanta for a Jimmy Buffett concert. Jesus fucking Christ, fucking kill me now. Chuck identified the log of their travels kept by the defendant. The log included 27 separate entries. Chuck testified that the defendant, Martha Ann, and the victim, Bob, had never traveled very much because Bob was pretty much a recluse. The defendant was laid off from her job in September 2006, and Chuck's only sources of income were disability benefits from the VA and the SSA. Despite this, the couple continued to travel and even purchased a large motor coach in 2007. Sometime in 2010 or 2011, Martha Ann spontaneously said to Chuck, "If anybody finds out whatever really happened to Bob, I will never see the light of day." She fucking said this. Well, according to Chuck, but he testified to this in a court of law. Chuck testified that prior to Bob's death, Chuck had placed a bag of pills into Bob's gun safe after he and the defendant, Martha Ann, decided that if they planted pills around the property, it would give more credence to the fact that Bob had been misusing drugs, possibly committing suicide. He and Martha Ann invited Martha Ann's son, Brian McGavic, Sean's brother, to stay with them in 2007, and they had arranged for Brian to discover the bag of pills in the gun safe. Holy shit. Chuck recalled that they told Brian that there were pills in there, possibly pills that Bob may have used during the time of overdose, and Brian reported it to the police. Chuck said that the pills discovered in the safe had actually belonged to him, and that he and Martha Ann hoped that the discovery of the pills would operate in Chuck's favor with regard to the charges that were pending against him at the time. Chuck, an Air Force veteran who served from 1972 until 2001, testified that despite having served only a single day in Southeast Asia in Vietnam, which was the 29th and 30th of April in 1975 during the evacuation of Saigon, he portrayed himself as a war hero with a higher rank as part of a hustle to get benefits and make money without having to work. He said that he worked with hustle from 2005 to 2012, and that Martha Ann not only knew about his hustle, but began one of her own during their time together. Martha Ann claimed to be a retired colonel from the United States Marine Corps and a former employee of the United States Department of State. Department of State. Chuck acknowledged falsifying his service record in order to increase the amount of benefits he received from the federal government, and that he pleaded guilty to federal offenses for that action. He said that he had been ordered to pay $659,000 in restitution to the various agencies from which he had obtained unearned benefits. So this fucking shitbag fucking never saw 1 minute of combat. He was in Southeast Asia. He was in Vietnam for 1 fucking day, and that was the day they were leaving Saigon. So this motherfucker saw no combat whatsoever and was claiming PTSD benefits. This guy was going around, and this is fucking factual. This guy was going around with forged medals. This guy was going around with forged medals, forged certificates, just fake honors, to the point to where he was actually fooling people higher ups in the government, in the military. And this guy was actually at soldiers' funerals folding up flags and handing them to the fallen soldiers' wives. I can't begin to explain to you how infuriating that is to me. I have nothing but the respect for a veteran and for a hero. And these men who willingly give their lives so that you and I can have basic freedoms. This piece of shit had the balls to take a beautiful tradition and pervert it just to keep up a facade so he could collect a few $1,000s. Chuck testified that the defendant filed to divorce him in 2012, telling him that if we got divorced and she was single, that it would be financially beneficial for tax purposes and some reason. Chuck said that he was incarcerated at the time, so her request didn't really bother him one way or the other. Isn't that nice? At least he didn't give a shit, right? Fucking pair of motherfuckers. Chuck testified that he provided a written statement to the TBI on December 20th, 2012, while he was serving a federal prison sentence. In the statement, he said that the defendant had asked him to bring over medication and to mix the prescription medications up so that it would look like Bob was stealing them from me and saving them up. He did as she asked. He said that he knew that Martha Ann gave Bob the drugs to overdose him, but did not see her do it. He explained. My first understanding is that she was overdosing him by putting the medication in his food. Martha Ann told me that she was going to overdose Bob so that we could be together. And with his history of drug overdoses, when she, quote, made him go away, end of quote, it would look like just another overdose that he had. Yeah, so this is some pretty disgusting shit, man. I mean, this is one of those things that I knew about, but hearing these details is, yeah, it's something that's really kind of getting under my skin here. So Martha Ann began putting large quantities of medication in Bob's food after Bob returned home from the hospital on May 13th, 2006. Chuck said that he knew that Martha Ann was going to start medicating Bob heavily when they got back to the house from the hospital, and he would probably die soon. He recalled that Martha Ann was specific about how and when she wanted Chuck to check on Bob, asking him to check on Bob at a specific time on the day that he died, so that Chuck would find him dead and she would be at work with an alibi. Wow. Chuck said that when Martha Ann told him when to check on the victim on May 15th, 2006, he was pretty sure that she was going to give him a lethal dose of the drugs because he was so close to dying anyway. And she was so specific about me being there at a certain period of the day on that date, he acknowledged that he staged the scene with the pill keeper, the gun, and the DNA order, or the DNR order. He said, I thought it would look better and more like he had committed suicide. Chuck said that he was aware that Martha Ann had forged the victim's will by manipulating the signature page of the will, and that she had done so because she didn't want Bob's sister, who lived in Florida, to get any of Bob's assets. After Bob's death, the defendant, Martha Ann, was able to remove Bob's name off of stocks that were in both their names and that were worth around $100,000 or more. Chuck said that as far as he knew, Martha Ann planned to kill Bob so that they could be together and not for financial reasons. Oh man, that's true love. Um, he added that they threw gas on the fire about that and told Martha Ann about now that Bob was dead, she needed to apply to get Bob's Veterans Affairs benefits and his Social Security benefits. Chuck testified that at some point he had downloaded the photographs of the victim onto his computer and then later deleted them. Well, yeah, the funny thing about that is they threw them in the trash bin on the computer. Now, even I know this shit. I'm about as computer stupid as anybody fucking gets, right? So they throw them in the trash bin in the computer, but the trash bin doesn't actually delete the shit. It doesn't delete the fucking information. So, you know, them looking through this shit, you know, eventually the computers end up with Shawn and Shawn's family, and so they come across it. You know, they find it in there. So it's always a beautiful thing when somebody so shitty does something so fucking stupid. It's always sweet. I love when that shit happens. So, during cross-examination, Chuck admitted that Martha Ann's desire to be rid of Bob was initially emotional because they wanted to be together. He acknowledged that following Bob's death, he came up with ways that Martha Ann could benefit financially from Bob's death. Chuck conceded that Bob was very difficult with taking medications. Chuck was very difficult with taking medications as prescribed, and that, as far as he knew, Martha Ann was administering all of Bob's medications because he had a tough time doing it himself. So basically, Bob, they painted this picture that Bob he couldn't handle his PTSD, and he was self-medicating all the time to the point where he was abusing his medication, and he was becoming suicidal. So they were painting this picture that he had this problem, and everybody was so concerned about Bob, like, what's happening with him? Why is he going down this dark hole? When in actuality, he wasn't the type to take his medication as it was. He didn't like it. He didn't like to be medicated. So she was putting it in his food. So naturally, he was trusting his wife. This poor man was trusting his wife and this man that was supposed to be his best friend, because they supposedly struggled with the same things, with the same emotional issues, because they shared similar experiences. And on Chuck's side, it was all a lie. And so his wife and this guy are fucking around behind this guy's back, pretending to take care of him, and they're slowly fucking killing him. So Brian, Shawn's brother, testified that he visited Martha Ann and Chuck in July of 2007, and that he was back and forth between Chuck's house in Knoxville and Coker Creek until he returned to Florida in September 2007. At that time, Martha Ann and Chuck spent the majority of their time in Coker Creek. Brian recalled a particular day when Martha Ann and Chuck asked him to locate a lost tool and told him where the tool might be located. When Brian found the tool, he also found a set of keys that would unlock the spin combination of the large gun vault in the garage. Martha Ann and Chuck gave Brian permission to open the vault and provided him with the combination. The vault contained only a grocery store bag full of loose medications, mixed medications, all out of their containers. Brian testified that Martha Ann and Chuck reacted to the discovery with shock and exasperation and asked Brian to contact the sheriff's office. Although he thought it was odd that they should ask him to telephone the police rather than place the call themselves, he did as they asked. While waiting for the police to arrive, Martha Ann and Chuck set up a card table and a couple of chairs in the middle of the driveway in front of the garage. What? So these guys set up a card table and chairs in front of the garage just waiting for the cops to show up. And Chuck had a digital camera and wanted to place himself where he could take photographs of Brian and the deputy together as the deputy was separating, identifying, and inventorying the medications that were found. Brian testified that he found the behavior of the defendant and Chuck very unusual. You'd think when he inquired about their behavior, they explained that they had planned on filing a lawsuit against Monroe County and that they were also planning on filing a lawsuit against the VA and that they were going to use this in their cases against both. So not only were these motherfuckers ripping off money from real veterans and the VA, but they're trying to sue the VA on top of it. Like, wow. It's fucking mind-blowing, man. It's fucking mind-blowing. When Brian inquired about their behavior, or when the police inquired about their behavior, they explained that they had planned on filing a lawsuit against blah, 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 blah. I already said that. Without a doubt, he had come to believe that Martha Ann and Chuck had manipulated him into accidentally finding the medication. So Brian says he told the cops, he was straight up with the cops and told them that he felt like it was all a big weird fucking setup and they were acting weird. So James Timothy Bridges, adjunct pharmacy programs manager at the VA Mountain Home Health Care Center in Johnson City, testified that on February 23, 2006, the victim received 15 to 30 milligram tablets of mirtazapine. Mr. Kazmarzik received 30 to 45 milligram tablets of mirtazapine on March 13th, March 28th, and May 9th, 2006. Chuck filled prescriptions for trazodone during the same period. Martin Edward Smith, a pharmacist at the VA hospital in Murfreesboro, testified that the victim received 45 15 milligram tablets of mirtazapine on March 1st and May 10th, 2006, and that he was instructed to take half a pill each day. The victim received 30 50 milligram trazodone tablets on January 6, 2006, and 15 50 milligram trazodone tablets on January 13th, January 23rd, and February 14th, 2006. Alright, so these are all, this goes on and on of how many times they picked up this dude's medication. And so, hold on, I'm just seeing, because again, I told you there's like 45 pages here, and if I don't have to read it all to get you guys the point here, then I'm going to do that. But so there's very, very detailed toxicology stuff here, but I'm going to just try to locate the real quick. Okay, so he was administered more than 7 times the maximum therapeutic range of 100 nanograms per milliliter. So yeah, they really, really did a number on Bob here. This is awful. But it's clearly obvious that he was overdosed. Um, and thank you, Kathleen, for that, because I don't know what these drugs are for, and it doesn't say here, or at least I missed it if it does. Um, but yeah, one is for anxiety and the other is an antidepressant, which makes perfect sense if you're suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. Um, so, so I'm going to get to Shawn's testimony here. Um, so Martha Ann initially, Shawn testified that Martha Ann initially told him that Bob had died as a result of several mini strokes. She said that he was acting strange at the house and he was starting to have mini strokes. And she loaded him, put him in her truck, and took him to the hospital. And on the way to the hospital, he had several mini strokes, and she thought he died on the way to the hospital. And she had to pull the truck over and resuscitate him. And she, I guess, got him back and then got him to the hospital. And once he got in the hospital, he passed away sometime at the hospital. Wow. So she just straight up fucking lied. I mean, she lied about everything. I mean, why lie about that? That doesn't even make sense. Why lie about saying that he died in the hospital? Why not just say that you found him dead, just like you would tell the police, right? So when Shawn later visited Martha Ann at the Coker Creek residence, Martha Ann told him that Bob had died of a heart attack at home. So she changed her story. Finally, in 2008, Martha Ann told Shawn that the victim had died of a drug overdose. So, okay, in all fairness, that could come off as a mother just trying to spare her, trying to find the right way to spare her son of a gruesome image of Bob when he died. So that's not what she was doing, but I could see it being looked at that way, Shawn testified that his relationship with Martha Ann had always been tumultuous, and that at some point in 2008, he and Martha Ann stopped speaking. In 2012, Shawn learned that Martha Ann and Chuck were under investigation for federal benefits fraud. He said that he contacted the defendant in August or September of 2012 after she was released on house arrest so that he could recover property from her and had originally belonged to his father and paternal grandparents. They began talking and he went to help her clean out the Coker Creek residence. Shawn testified that at the time, Martha Ann, anticipating a stint on federal prison, executed a durable power of attorney to allow Shawn to conduct affairs on her behalf and provided him with the deeds to the Coker Creek residence and the Knoxville residence that she shared with Chuck. She also gave him full control of all her belongings, including 3 computers. When Shawn examined the contents of the computers, he found some photos on one of the computers given to him by Martha Ann that appeared to be Bob set up in different ways. In January 2013, Martha Ann contacted Shawn and said that she had been questioned about Bob's death and wanted him to come over right away. Now you're going to want to listen to this. When Shawn arrived, Martha Ann was in the downstairs bathroom with the radio on because she was afraid that somebody was listening in. She told Shawn that the TBI had come and questioned her about Bob's death and referring to the computers she had given to Shawn. Apparently she said, "I don't know if you know somebody is going to come to your house to get anything. But if you could, you may want to take these computers to an IT person to delete the information. Have him go through these computers that I gave you and delete whatever is on them. And that way your kids can use them. Wow. So during cross-examination, Shawn testified that Chuck had signed the Knoxville residence over to Martha Ann, and that Martha Ann had added to Shawn's name to the deeds for both the Knoxville and Coker Creek residence before she began her federal prison sentence. Shawn clarified that he had discovered the photographs of the victim on the computer before he had the conversation wherein Martha Ann told him to delete the information on the computers. Shawn maintained that Martha Ann and the victim had purchased the Coker Creek residence using money awarded to Shawn from a car accident and money that Shawn had inherited from the time he was born. He acknowledged that Martha Ann had executed a quitclaim deed to him for the Coker Creek residence, insisting that it had been purchased with his money and that no one was living in it. So Shawn was in an accident when he was younger, and he got a settlement out of it. But because he was underage, I guess, I'll let Shawn clarify all these details tomorrow. But because he was underage, I guess she had control of it, which he later, from what I understand, he sued her for. And he also inherited something from a close family friend who died when he was very young. So he had an inheritance that she basically stole from him. So TBI agent Josh Melton testified that he was contacted by federal agents who informed him that there was intelligence information that might pertain to a death. He later received a written request for investigation from the Monroe County District Attorney's Office. After a brief conversation with Detective Jones, Agent Melton made the independent decision as TBI that we were not going to view. That we were not going to view the MCSO case file for the investigation for Chuck. Sorry about that. Agent Melton spoke to Shawn, who indicated that he had computers, electronic storage devices, and documents that had been given to him by Martha Ann that had pertained to the death of the victim. Shawn surrendered to Agent Melton documents and computers given to him by Martha Ann. So, Agent Melton testified that the last will and testament in its entirety as a whole, a forgery. It has been manipulated, cut and pasted. The book page numbers are cut and pasted on each page from the durable power of attorney onto the will on each one of those pages, and then all the signature lines and the filling dates are exactly the same on the end of the will as they are on the durable power of attorney. So there's evidence, clear evidence, that she forged these signatures and manipulated Bob's will. So I'm trying to get through a lot of the stuff here that we've already gone through. I don't want to keep repeating myself. Yeah, there's a lot of testimony here from different people, and a lot of it is basically just testimony that I'm not going to go over every single testimony from every single witness, because that would be pretty time consuming, and we're already in over an hour here. So I'll talk a little bit more about Bob, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over the appeal, and why she's appealing. Um, Chuck, there's been interviews that I've witnessed where Chuck is described, like I said before, as very, very shady. Um, and what this guy would do, besides, you know, attending funerals and pretending to be this decorated war hero, he would also do that at these functions, with, airborne rangers, and and he would talk and talk a lot. And these men who did see real combat. Now, I don't know if you know a lot of, if you're listening. I've met a few veterans. I've known a few veterans in my lifetime, and I've been honored to know these veterans. And these veterans, they don't talk a lot about their experiences generally. And if they do, it's an occasion that seems to call for it. And when they do talk about it, you can sense something extremely beautiful and genuine there. There's almost a sense of empathy for the people that they're telling this stuff to, because they don't want anyone to have to even remotely feel what their experiences has caused them to feel. And so you stand there. You stand there with pure respect. You can't help it. You're frozen and you're listening. And then you have those people who just talk. And they talk all the time, bragging. Sometimes, almost bragging about bad experiences that happen to them. Which in itself is very odd when you hear people do that, and I take issue in that. I take issue with that when I hear it. So Chuck was the kind of guy that would do this a lot, and he would do this in front of men who really lived through these combat experiences, which was very, very, in my opinion, not only is it naive and stupid, but it's also insulting, to a degree that I can't begin to describe. It's very, very disgusting to me that this man would have the audacity to stand in front of men who have watched their comrades die in front of them, or have limbs blown off, or have to carry them, or have to patch up their blood, or listen to them cry about how they want to go home and be immediately from their the most brave possible state that a human being could be, to being at the most vulnerable emotionally state that a human being could be. And when you have not experienced this, and you're talking to people who have, and you're talking to them as though you have, you're gonna be exposed as a fraud. There's just no way around that. You're going to be exposed as a fraud, and these men are not going to appreciate that. And so they were collectively helpful in making sure that this man was put away. There was in the Dateline episode, there's a particular guy who worked for the VA. He worked for Veterans Affairs, and he was an investigator. And he straight, man, he had a hard on for Chuck, because he knew he was full of shit, and he was just dying to nail this guy to the wall. And he finally did. He actually did. And this is when this shitbag totally throws his wife under the bus, which is why she ends up standing trial and why she ends up convicted for murder, because they slowly. Shawn was even telling me that there was, what they suspect happened. He would overdose. Bob would overdose many, many times. And there were many times where they would drive him to the hospital, but they would purposely drive him so slow uh, that it was in attempts to be able to say that, oh man, we tried to make it to the hospital, but we couldn't. Yeah, supposedly, yeah. From what I understand, there's I might have skipped some of that, but supposedly there were witnesses that say that they passed by their car on the way to the hospital, and they were driving so slow that they had to go around them. So the suspicion is that they were driving slow, hoping that Bob would die in the car before they get to the hospital, so they could say, oh, we tried to make it to the hospital as fast as we could, and we tried to take him and save his life, but he died before we could make it. Which is just fucked up. So, this case is everything that took place here is absolutely disgusting to me. And the fact that Shawn had such a had he the fact that he suffered as much as he did, because he was quoted in other interviews saying that apparently he asked the judge for the maximum sentence for his own adoptive mother because Bob and him were very, very close, and he considered Bob to be the grandfather of his children. So, there's a little bit more here. I'm going to get to a little bit more. So remember, I also told you that Martha Ann did her share of lying to collect benefits. Now, Bob is he was a genuine decorated war hero. The only person in this scenario that actually was a decorated war hero and actually did suffer from PTSD. And Bob had, or Martha Ann had claimed that she had a Purple Heart and earned that Purple Heart through being a hero during the Pentagon attack during 9/11. So, surprise, surprise, these people turn out to be even more pieces of shit than we thought. So, I'm going to read a little bit more here. Martha Ann said that on the day of Bob's death, the three of them ate breakfast together, and then she left for work. Chuck left at the same time, and as she did go... Hold on, sorry. Martha Ann said that when she returned home from work, she saw emergency vehicles everywhere, and that she said that police would not allow her to enter the residence until several days after the victim's death, and that she stayed with Miss Hartman during that time. She testified that she was shocked when she learned about Chuck had been charged in relation with the victim's death, and when police told her that Chuck had altered the scene and taken photographs, she couldn't understand why he would do something like that. Which I agree with, because if I'm planning a murder, and I'm co-planning it with somebody, and I give somebody specific instructions and say, hey, listen, dickhead, what you're going to do, I'm going to go to work, and that's going to be my alibi, and then you're just going to discover the body. Very, very simple. You had one fucking job. Nobody told you to fucking take pictures, you fucking moron. So what's funny is she's coming off like I don't understand why he would do that. So she's coming off like she doesn't understand why he would do something so sick and twisted, but she's also probably not really understanding why he would do something like that, because that's fucking just plain dumb. So she said that after Chuck was released from jail, she took him his truck and suitcase, and Chuck denied having any involvement in the victim's death. He told her that he made those pictures and that he sprinkled the pills in the deal with the gun because he wanted to take pictures that he thought would help me with the VA. The defendant adamantly denied sprinkling medication on the victim's food. That is an absolute and out lie. I never ground up any of his medication. I never attempted to kill my husband. I didn't want him dead. I still wish he was around today. She also denied discussing killing the victim with Chuck, where he cooked this up. I never heard this story before he and I were arrested in July of 2012. She said that she had no reason to kill the victim for financial gain because she had her own money. So this woman's sticking to her story despite testimony from fucking everybody saying that she was acting shady and she was trying to cover up evidence. So she claimed that she and Bob had living wills, and powers of attorney that mirrored each other, and that they took all 6 documents to be witnessed and notarized in January 2004. She said that the one document that in shuffling all the papers that we did not get signed and notarized was his will. The defendant said that she first realized that the victim's will had not been signed or notarized when she looked at it in August 2007. She claimed that Chuck took the real will that Bob had drawn up, and had cut and pasted to fit the pages of his power of attorney to where it looked like it had been signed and notarized, but it never was. It was fake in that issue. She insisted that the contents of the will were the victim's wishes, but he never signed it the day that they were at the bank, and so that was how the will got falsified. She said that she did not object to Chuck's altering the will, and admitted that she had mailed a copy of the will to Miss Inzerillo and Miss Guin. The defendant testified that shortly after the victim's death, Chuck invited her to attend a Jimmy Buffett concert with him in Stone Mountain, Georgia, and she went. She said that they shared a hotel room, but not a bed, during that trip. Fuck out of my face with that bullshit. After that trip, Chuck continued to come to the Coker Creek residence to help her with yard work and take care of the animals. Martha Ann agreed to loan Chuck the money to hire an attorney to represent him on the original Monroe County charges related to Bob's death. She insisted that they were not romantically involved when she loaned him the money, and maintained that they were not romantically involved before Bob's death. So she's singing a completely different song here than Chuck did. So she said that she agreed to travel to New England with Chuck to visit his family on July 4th weekend or the week of July 4th, 2006, and she became romantically involved with Chuck during that trip. The defendant testified that she agreed to marry Chuck in October 2006 because she needed back surgery, but had been laid off from her job, and as a result had lost her health insurance coverage. See, this is what blows my mind about this mindset. So this whole thing, she's not even realizing, as she's testifying, she's not even realizing that the motive is money here. That's what they're going for. They're trying to prove to the court that their motive is money, and that's all they gave a shit about. So instead of trying to deviate from that and separate herself from that persona and be in that light, she makes an excuse for wanting money. She says, "Oh no, I wanted money, but I wanted money for different reasons. So that's why I married Chuck, because I didn't have health insurance and my back was fucked up." So she said that Chuck offered to add her to his insurance policy and agreed that they not have to tell anyone that they were married, since it has nothing to do it was nothing but a business deal. She said they were romantically involved at the time, but that she wasn't in love with the man. So yeah, I'm a slut, but I'm not a slut. Okay. The defendant said that she lived with Chuck and the Knoxville residents during the winter of 2007, but the couple separated at some point after she saw an email that Chuck had written to another woman. Martha Ann testified that in May 2007, while living alone at the Coker Creek residence, she overdosed on some pills, and Chuck came in and came down to the house and found me. After she had sobered up, Chuck told her that she needed to pursue psychiatric help at the VA. At some point, the defendant mortgaged the Coker Creek residence to pay for the motor coach. She finally agreed to openly marry Chuck in October of 2009. Now, supposedly, they also bought this big fucking lavish, fancy motorhome and decided to do some traveling in the motorhome. I mean, it was Chuck and Martha Ann time right after Bob died. It was cruises, it was vacations, it was fun in the sun, man. So, but she really wishes that Bob was still in her life. So after she and Chuck were arrested and charged with federal offenses, she hired a private investigator who found out that Chuck was a fraud and a con man. Martha Ann testified that she filed for divorce from Chuck in December 2012 after she spoke to the private investigator. After that, Chuck told this wild, concocted story of her having murdered the victim for the first time. She added, "I did not kill Bob McClancy. I did not have anything to do with killing Bob McClancy. I cannot tell you anything more than what I know, that he died of a drug overdose. I know that when he died, I begged Dr. Tulsi to please not put on his death certificate that it was a suicide, because as a Catholic, Bob could not have had a Catholic funeral if it had been ruled a suicide. And I begged them not to do that. I said none of us know what his state of mind was when this happened." God, she's a fucking saint, man. So she testified that 2 weeks before she was scheduled to be released from federal custody, she was charged with murder in Monroe County, and that she had sat in Monroe County jail for 76 weeks. During cross-examination, she insisted that Shawn lied when he said that she had used proceeds from his civil settlement to pay for the Coker Creek residence. She also said that Shawn lied when he said that she told him the victim had died of a stroke, but she admitted that she told everybody at first that he had died of a heart attack because I did not want that dirty linen aired that he had died of an overdose. Okay, so she was more worried about her image. That's another thing. She was extremely concerned with her image. She was very prim and proper. According to Shawn, they grew up very. They had a lot of strong political ties. And during Shawn's, young child, like his child years. So they were they were raised that very proper way, you know, salad fork being on this side and this and that whole thing. They were raised that way, and it's very, you know, it's southern. It's, you know, the very proper southern uppity vibe that you've seen many times, like depicted in the movies. This is very much what it was like growing up with her. But apparently, she was a big spender and a pack rat, and yes, Irish. It's all about maintaining the mask. So everything was image to these people, to her especially. Everything was image. Shawn was never like that. I mean, when you guys speak with Shawn tomorrow, you'll see he's definitely not this guy. It's just that this was how he was brought up. He was brought up, well, he wasn't brought up that way. They tried to bring him up that way, but he was definitely brought up in that environment. So it's very fascinating to see how little it's affected him. Um, so she admitted that she had cut and dyed her hair, but insisted that she had not done so until after Bob's death. She admitted that she had lied to the victim's daughter about the location of the victim's ashes. She also conceded that she had given the will and power of attorney documents to Chuck so that he could alter them, and that she had sent the forged will to Bob's family members. So she admits to basically all the fraud, but she's on trial for murder right now. So the angle that she's playing, what I'm getting out of this, the angle she's playing right now is, well, not right now, but as I'm reading this, she's trying to come off like she's honest. Well, yeah, I did this. Yeah, I did that. But oh, no, no, no. But I would never, ever, ever kill my husband. There's no fucking way on earth I could ever do that. But I'm willing to cooperate and tell you everything that I've done wrong. I'm laying it all out for you. You know, so, which is, so the judge just sees right through this shit, which is great. Um, so, based upon this evidence, the jury convicted her as charged of conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, but convicted her of the lesser included offense of attempted first-degree murder in lieu of the charged offense of first-degree premeditated murder. Following a sentence hearing, the trial court imposed consecutive sentences of 25 years, the maximum within the range for the defendant's convictions. The defendant filed a timely but unsuccessful motion for new trial, followed by a timely notice of appeal. Okay, so there's more stuff that I'm going to get to here. I'm going to go. Kathleen, no, Shawn is not Bob's son. Shawn, I'll go over this real quick one more time just to refresh everybody, anybody who kind of got in here late. Shawn was adopted as a child, as a small child, as an infant, by Martha Ann and her husband at the time, who Shawn actually still has a relationship with. I don't have his name in front of me right now. But we'll go over all of that tomorrow. But she had divorced him and then remarried to Bob. But Bob spent the majority of Shawn's life as his father figure, and they had a very close relationship. So Shawn did consider him to be his dad. He at least considered him to be his children's grandfather, and I quote that. So So this is her. Um, a little bit more on Shawn's testimony. Shawn testified that after the defendant had been charged in federal court, she was placed on house arrest. While she was on house arrest at the Coker Creek residence, she executed a durable power of attorney that granted Shawn authority over all her affairs. She provided him with keys to both the Knoxville residence and the Coker Creek residence. She gave Sean McGavic 3 computers and told him that they were for him and his children to use. She told him to let the kids have free reign on them, quote unquote. The Apple computers in particular. Shawn testified that after he let the children use the computers, one of his children found a photograph of one of Shawn's nephews inside a casket following the nephew's death. So Shawn had a nephew who died. His brother Brian's son, I believe. I don't remember what he died of, but he died, and they had a funeral for this child, naturally, and apparently Chuck, for whatever reason, took photographs at this funeral. Who the fuck takes pictures of a funeral? Who the fuck takes pictures of a kid at a kid's funeral? So he took pictures of the child in his casket and had them stored in his computer. And when Shawn got the computers from his mom, from Martha Ann, and said for the kids to use the computers however they want, one of the kids found this picture of their dead cousin in a casket, because Chuck was a sick fuck who, for some reason, got some sort of pleasure off of taking pictures of this child. So at that point, Shawn decided to look through the rest of the photographs on each of the computers to make sure the children didn't find anything else that was inappropriate. He found pictures of Bob in the computer's trash bin. Bob appeared to be deceased. In some of the photographs, the victim, quote, had a gun in one hand and no gun. In the next picture, he didn't have a gun. In one picture, he was laying a different way or position, and in the next picture, he was in another position. In another photo, the kitchen was disarray. In the next photo, the kitchen was just fine. And then in another photo, there were pills on the kitchen table, and in the next photo, there weren't pills on the kitchen table. After observing the photographs, Shawn unplugged the computers and didn't mess with them anymore. He then contacted Agent Landkammer to report what he had seen and to ask the agent to come and get the computers. Shawn later gave the computers given to him by Martha Ann to Agent Melton. In a telephone conversation after Shawn's discovery of the photographs, the defendant told him that he should try to get rid of those photos off the computers, which we went over before. Later, during a face-to-face visit, she asked him to have his IT friend delete the photos. During cross-examination, Shawn testified that the federal agents never looked in the computer and refused to take possession of any of the computers. He recalled that when Agent Melton came to retrieve the computers, he had a search warrant and was accompanied by agents from the VA and SSA. He said that agents of the TBI executed 2 search warrants, one dated November 15th and one March 15th. So Agent Melton testified that he received information from the Office of Special Investigations for the VA and the SSA, and that the defendant had given Shawn some computers that might contain information relating to the victim's death. Agent Melton testified that although Shawn was eager to turn the computers over to the TBI, he obtained warrants to search the defendant's Knoxville residence, the McGavic residence, and the contents of the computers and other digital media. Additionally, Agent Melton asked both Shawn and his wife to execute consents to search the computer's digital media and documents that Shawn provided to Agent Melton. So the judge, says, the first basis for my ruling is I think that Martha Ann relinquished an expectation of privacy to this property. I don't believe she has standing. That's the first basis. And I'm going to go through many alternatives to say why this evidence is admissible. But I don't think she any longer had the ability to come into our court and say, that's mine, you couldn't do that because it's mine. An individual has no right to possession of contraband or evidence of illegal activity. Courts are to make two inquiries. One, whether the individual by the conduct has exhibited an actual subjective expectation of privacy. I do not find even that first prong in this case. The testimony was she gave it up. She gave it to Shawn. She gave him not only the property, but she gave him power of attorney. She voluntarily relinquished it. And when she did that, I don't think she exhibited any personal subjective expectation in privacy. And the second prong is whether that individual's subjective expectation of privacy is one that society or this court is prepared to recognize as reasonable. I don't feel it's reasonable for her to say now that she has an expectation in those computers and in those floppy disks. She gave it all up. She gave power of attorney back in 2012. I just don't think with the facts as they were presented, this court or society would think that she has a right recognized as reasonable. So, yeah. So, straight up, the judge was just like, fuck you. You gave that shit up. That's not yours. You're done. So, all this stuff, now there's all these laws that are just written. So that's pretty much the end of it right there. Now I'm going to go over the appeal a little bit. Martha Ann McClancy appeals her Monroe County criminal court jury convictions of attempted first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, arguing that the trial court erred by denying her motion to suppress photographs of the scene taken by her co-conspirator Charles Kaczmarzyk. Her motion in limine to exclude evidence of acts committed following the deaths of the victim, and her motion for a mistrial, that the trial court erred by admitting photographs of the victim taken during an autopsy, that the trial's court making negative comments to and about her in front of the jury deprived her of the right to a fair trial, that the evidence was insufficient to support her convictions, and that the trial court erred by imposing consecutive sentences. The state concedes, and we agree, that the trial court erred by imposing consecutive sentences in this case. Instead, because code section blah 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 blah, dual convictions for two inchoate offenses designed to achieve the same objective, that trial court should have merged the defendant's convictions. Thus, we affirm the jury verdicts, reserve the imposition of consecutive sentences, and remand the case for the entry of corrected judgment forms reflecting that the convictions are merged. Now, there's the whole thing where she There's one part here that I read earlier, discussing her, basically discussing the, I believe they were inappropriate comments made by the judge. Um, and as soon as I can find that, I'm going to read that to you. And then I'm going to go over a little bit. I'm going to go over the chat a little bit. Yeah, there is so much here. Um, okay, so the motion for mistrial, blah, blah, blah. Okay. So Martha Ann claims that the trial court made negative comments during her testimony that amounted to an improper comment on the evidence, and that he yelled at her in the presence of the jury and showed a general disdain for the defendant during her testimony, and these actions deprived her of the right to a fair trial. She's really reaching. So, okay, she contends that the trial court's actions essentially prohibited her from being able to explain and or tell her version of the events without specific parameters in her testimony, and that her direct testimony was essentially shut down by the trial court. The state asserts that the trial court committed no error. The defendant's direct examination testimony was marked by ramblings, narrative littered with irrelevant details and inadmissible hearsay. The state made its first objection during a particularly hearsay-heavy tangent about comments made to the victim by some of the program participants about coming to a get-together hosted by the defendant and the victim. The state objected, and the trial court correctly sustained the objection, noting that it was not relevant where all the people were coming from. The state objected again during another such tangent when the defendant inserted her having been diagnosed with colon cancer into her response to the question of what had prompted her to look at the victim's will in August of 2007. Finally, the state objected when, and coming up right here, this is from the stenographer while this was happening in court, so word for word in a minute here. Finally, the state objected when the defendant mentioned that she had been charged with the victim's murder only 2 weeks before she was scheduled to be released from federal custody, and that she had sat in Monroe County Jail for 76 weeks awaiting trial. The trial court took another recess, and the following exchange took place outside the presence of the jury. The judge: all right, I've had enough. I feel like she is intentionally, and then paused himself. And then the court officer, the bailiff, says, Larry, shut the door. The judge says, shut the door. That always happens. Every time they go out for some reason, they want to hold that thing open. So he's just bitching about the door being open, right? So the judge says, I have heard her talk about selling eggs to poverty here in Monroe County, people who are rubbing nickels together. I've heard about colon cancer. I've heard about 76 weeks. I've heard about best interest. I'm not really guilty. She is trying to inflame and prejudice this jury. If a state witness did half of the stuff that she's doing, if a state witness did half of what she's doing, you would be moving for a mistrial. And none of that is admissible. It's prejudicial. It is merely designed to inflame the emotional passions of this jury, and we have sustained the objection, and sustained and sustained. She has tried to taint this enough. She has, and no more. How much more direct are we going to have? That's fine, but let it be about substantive issues. She is trying to taint this jury pool. That is this court's opinion. None of that is admissible. None of it. And I would instruct you, please, I'm not yelling at you, I'm just yelling. You know, the hearsay. She's stunned every time I sustain an objection. All that emotional stuff is irrelevant. It doesn't come in. It's inadmissible. And I would ask that during this break you instruct her to focus on the issues. Anything she wanted to do, trust me, it's out there. It is out there. She has, and she said, had to say numerous times, Roman Catholic. It's all out there. I'm going to take a 5-minute recess. You are instructed to stick to the facts. Stick to the facts of this case, ma'am. So this is what she's in a big stink about. She did not like being yelled at. She did not like being called out on her bullshit, is what happened. So this judge straight up he just got annoyed with her bullshit, and she was totally being manipulative towards the jury. She kept saying things like Roman Catholic. She kept saying things that were trying to gain sympathy from the jury, and the judge was on to it. And every time there was an objection, it was sustained, but yet it kept happening. So he got sick and fucking tired of her lawyer not telling her, hey, you need to chill out with that bullshit because you're fucking with the jury and that's unfair. And he straight up said that if it was coming from the other side, they'd be fucking moving for a mistrial. So cut that shit out. And he was clear. He did say, yeah, Mignon. He did say, hey, listen, I'm not yelling at you. I'm just yelling. Which is true because he never actually addressed her. He addressed her attorney. He was talking about her and he was emotional, obviously, but he was talking to her attorney. So that's what you're supposed to do. And the attorney wasn't doing his fucking job. So fuck it. You know? That's the judge's job. Is, hey, do your fucking job. Do your fucking job. So, yeah. The defendant's claims that the trial court commented on the evidence and yelled at the defendant in the presence of the jury are completely belied by the record. The record clearly establishes that the trial court excused the jury from the courtroom before admonishing the defendant. So yes, he asked the jury to leave, and then he got fucking pissed off because the door was left open. So this guy did what he could. Although the court officer asked someone to shut the door, there is no proof that any juror heard the trial court, even if we assume that the door in question was the door to the jury room. Furthermore, the only thing uttered by the trial court before the officer asked for the door to be shut was, "All right, I've had enough. I feel like she's intentionally," and then he stops, right? So we cannot fathom how this comment, even if heard by the jury, can be classified as a comment on the evidence or how it might have prejudiced the defendant. So, yeah, I'm with them on that. So, I don't know about you guys, but this case, like, being someone who is fascinated by true crime stories, this case blew my fucking mind. And it blew my fucking mind that somebody that I hang out with every day was so deeply involved in this and yet stood steadfast through the whole thing. And you know what I love about Shawn the most in all of this is his concern this entire time was his children. That's it. He was concerned every step of the way. He was concerned about the safety of his children. And I can tell you this now. I've met his children. I have yet to meet his daughter. I think I'm going to meet his daughter tomorrow. But he comes in to my job with his son, with his 18-year-old son, who's a freshman in college. One of the smartest kids I've ever met in my life. Super, super duper smart. And you know, we they go up and work out. I'm usually working, but they go up and work out, and I like to work out alone. Shawn puts on his thing, his headphones, and he works out by himself. But then the last, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes, because they always come in about at least 30 minutes before close. And about the last 15 minutes or so, they go into the basketball gym and they shoot baskets and they throw a football around. And then normally the last 5 minutes after I've shut everything down and I'm ready to just waiting for everybody to leave and we're actually closed, I go in there and throw the football around with them too. Um, and and then sometimes on my days off, you know, we get together. Shawn's got a good job, uh, and he's, you know, it's him and his son, his 18-year-old son that live together, and he has his youngest son with him sometimes on weekends, which he had this weekend. So I've met him, but I haven't spent a lot of time with him. I just kind of, you know, we make a little small talk here and there. But he's a great kid, and Shawn is, you know, he likes sports. I'm not a big sports fan, but he likes sports, and he collects toys. He's kind of a pack rat himself, but it's mostly like toys from the 80s and stuff like that. When I first walked into Shawn's apartment, man, I was like, fucking holy shit. This is, you know, I felt like a little kid again. I was seeing toys that I had, you know, in my preteen days that I hadn't seen since, and I forgot all about, and it was super nostalgic. And one more thing you need to know about Shawn. I told you he was adopted. So all the stuff that he ended up with, which were, you know, his mother's possessions too. He ended up with his mother's possessions, and she kept baby books, right? And this is 100% true. There are, and I'll quote an article here written about this case, from the Daily Beast. I just have to find the spot here. Shawn, there is evidence. There is evidence. Hold on one second. Sorry, I'm getting like an ad blocker thing, and it's getting on my nerves, and I'm trying to just look at this article, and it's pissing me off. So there's evidence that, well, I wouldn't say evidence, but there's a lot of documentation in his baby books that indicate towards him or his natural birth mother having something to do with the infamous Jonestown massacre. This is a fact. This is not some made-up thing. This is not. This is absolutely true. Shawn still to this day does not know who his birth mother is. He does know who his birth father is, and he is ever since he found out through DNA. He did the whole ancestry thing, and through DNA he was able to find his birth father, and he to this day maintains a relationship with his birth father, and they're kind of close. So but there is, like I said, there's a lot of indication that there's a connection between his birth mother and the Jonestown family, which fucking blows my mind, honestly. Um, so I'm trying to. This thing, the ad blocker keeps coming on. Um, and I can't. Well, yeah, I can't read that, so I'm sorry about that. But anyway, yeah. So the fact that he somehow has some connection to the whole Kool-Aid mass suicide thing um, is pretty crazy. So, um, and I'll let Shawn go over that stuff with you tomorrow. But the main reason why I'm covering this case is to help Shawn and other adults like him uh, have the right to access certain documents that would allow him to trace back and have and obtain answers of his past and of his history. Um, no, Kathleen, he's not African American. I don't even think even remotely. It's there's nothing in his DNA about that, from what I understand. Um, but yeah, there's definitely some sort of connection with that, and I'm gonna let Shawn talk about that stuff tomorrow. Um, but I'm gonna go over a little bit here in the chat and and see what you guys are saying. Um, and I really appreciate you guys being so cool in the chat. You guys seemed really engaged, and this case covering it was really important to me. And I wanted to do it as I do apologize for not being very articulate at times. I wanted this to be a very genuine. I wanted to express this stuff very genuinely, my opinions very genuinely, and I only wanted to stick to the facts. I did not want to go over, uh, uh, you know, opinions from the press or anything like that. So everything that you guys just heard was straight from these official court documents, and and I'm really looking forward to hearing what Shawn has to say tomorrow, and he's going to have some interesting stories to tell because he actually likes telling these stories. Um, he's an interesting guy, but uh, it's it's already we're going on 2 hours and 15 minutes here, and I really want to thank you guys for logging on. Again, this case was really important to me, and I'm really glad that all my favorite familiar people showed up. And I really encourage you guys to log on again tomorrow. I don't have a specific time on that just yet, because again, I'm kind of working with Shawn's schedule too. We're supposed to go and actually we're supposed to go meet his daughter at her job, and I'm looking forward to that. And he's going to be excited to meet all of you guys too, because he's like I said, he's a real chill guy. Um, I Mystic, I think Chuck did get a deal for his testimony, but he died in prison anyway, so it doesn't fucking matter. So fuck him. Uh, and yeah, it just blows my mind that. Well, it doesn't blow my mind. You know, these people behaved in a textbook manner that these people would have behaved, right? I mean, they just started throwing each other under the bus, and them throwing each other under the bus, that in this really odd way connected it connected in a way that made it seem as though they were guilty. They both made themselves look guilty by throwing each other under the bus. Their stories connected and intertwined in a way that led to the truth. Their lies did, which is crazy. that's what that's one of the things that's so fascinating to me about this. So the good thing about this is justice has been served. Now, again, she is. This is this thing I read to you is from a file for appeal. She's appealing her case. So she's appealing her case. So anything could happen, but I don't think unless she somehow gained sympathy from a judge, I just don't see it. But she's definitely that type of person. I mean, these people would switch. They shared a wheelchair, and then they would switch back and forth going to the VA to collect benefits. One would wheel the other, but they would use the same fucking. And then there's video footage. They're caught by the agent that works for Veteran Affairs. And he actually set it up. It's funny. It's in the 2020 interview with him. He actually says that just to fucking have fun with it, he set up appointments for the both of them on the same day, just to see how they would work out the wheelchair situation. So. So he had a little fun with it, and he admitted to having a little fun with it, which I found was funny. But that 2020 interview, I thought about. I thought about somehow burning it and then putting it on my channel. But I don't know what kind of copyright shit I'm going to get in trouble with. And what's funny is there's certain things to me that are worth a copyright strike, But the thing is. It's not worth it to me to have to take the video down, and I really wanted to share these facts with you guys about it, and so I wanted to be real careful with that, and but if you can somehow obtain that 2020 episode, it's a 2-hour episode, and it's called Secrets in the Smokies, and it's really informative, and it's not 2020. Was I saying 2020? It's Dateline. Sorry about that. I just realized I was probably saying 2020, but it's actually Dateline, and it's quite the story. So I'm gonna be getting out of here in a minute. I'm going to make myself something to eat. I maybe have a glass of wine. But I had a blast with you guys. Thanks for staying with me. Thanks for sticking around for 2 hours. I love you guys very much, and I will talk to you guys tomorrow. I'll see you tomorrow, hopefully with Shawn, if everything goes well. I hung out with him a little bit tonight after work, and he says we're on. So we will see. But I'm guessing it'll be hopefully what I'm hoping for, and I'm shooting for somewhere around 8 or 9 o'clock, give or take around that time. But thanks again, guys. If you want to write, make sure to if you want to honestly. If you want to share this once we go live with Shawn tomorrow, I really want him to share that information with you. It's really important to me and him that we get the information about adults who've been adopted and their rights. I don't have all that information. I'm going to let Shawn do that, but hopefully when we do the second part of that, you guys will like and share these videos. Just these two. I don't give a shit about the other ones so much. I just want to get that message out and make people aware of this issue. So that's my main purpose of doing this tonight and tomorrow. And I if you want to write me, uh, again, that email is theglarer360@gmail.com. And you can, again, join the group, the Facebook group that I have called The Glarer. And you'll see a lot of familiar faces in there, or at least names. and yeah, again, man, hit that like button on this one. I'm not the type to usually ask for that, but again, this is a very personal one to me here. So go ahead and click that like button, and hopefully tomorrow you like what you hear, and you'll go ahead and share these. But anyway, I I love you guys, and thanks a lot for logging on. I will see you guys tomorrow.